The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has called for African nations to unite and stand its ground to prevent being exploited for its rock, soil and dust. This after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio praised.
At first, it looked like another summit, another speech, another carefully worded warning about colonial history. But the tone was different. Why are global powers suddenly racing for African minerals? Why does the green energy revolution begin in African soil but end in foreign factories? And why are African leaders now speaking less about aid and more about leverage? Because something has shifted. Africa was never poor. It was underpriced. For decades, the story was that Africa lacked capital, technology, and structure. Yet beneath that narrative, African minerals powered the modern world. Cobalt-fueled smartphones and electric vehicles. Platinum stabilized automotive systems and supports hydrogen technology. Uranium-powered electricity grids. Gold, lithium, manganese, and rare earth elements became foundations of modern industry. If Africa has powered global development for over a century, why has it negotiated like a borrower instead of a supplier? The answer is structural. The old model was simple. Extract raw materials, export them, and allow processing, manufacturing, branding, and patents to happen elsewhere. Then re-import finished products at premium prices. The highest margins lived outside the continent. It was efficient, just not for Africa. When leaders speak about exporting rock, soil, and dust, it isn't poetic language. It's a diagnosis. Selling raw inputs while buying finished innovation traps a country at the bottom of the value chain. And value chains are where power hides. Today's generation understands this instinctively. They watched supply chains collapse during global crises. They saw how shipping disruptions shook entire economies. They know whoever controls processing, logistics, and standards controls leverage. And the global energy transition has changed everything. Electric vehicles depend on lithium and cobalt. Hydrogen technologies depend on platinum group metals. Renewable grids rely on rare earth elements. The future is mineral-intensive, and those minerals are heavily concentrated in Africa. That means Africa is not peripheral to the transition. It is central. Central actors do not beg. They negotiate. But negotiation requires coordination. For decades, mineral deals were signed country by country, often under pressure and often in competition with neighboring states. This fragmentation weakened bargaining power. Buyers benefited from division. Now, that fragmentation is being questioned. Continental integration efforts and shared beneficiation strategies are not ideological gestures. They are attempts to correct a pricing error, the underpricing of African leverage. Africa is not underdeveloped because it lacks resources. It is underleveraged because it exports them before transformation. There is a difference between knowing you have resources and realizing the world cannot function without them. In the past, Africa was told its minerals were valuable. But valuable for whom? On whose terms? In which part of the chain? Now the conversation is sharper. Cobalt is battery stability. Lithium is electric mobility. Platinum is hydrogen infrastructure. When industrialized nations speak about net zero targets and supply chain security, they are indirectly speaking about Africa. Leverage does not mean confrontation. It means recognizing that your signature matters. When multiple industrial powers compete for access to the same mineral base, the supplier gains power, if it uses it correctly. For years, that competition did not benefit Africa because negotiations were isolated. Countries competed for foreign investment by lowering royalties, extending tax holidays, and softening regulations. The race for capital sometimes undermined long-term structural gain. But younger policymakers and economists are asking new questions. They want refining capacity tied to extraction licenses. They want equity participation in joint ventures. They want technology transfer and local training written into agreements. They want timelines for domestic processing. They are not anti-investment. They are anti-one-sided architecture. The African Continental Free Trade Framework strengthens this shift. A fragmented continent negotiates in pieces. An integrated market negotiates at scale. A processing plant in one country can serve regional demand. Shared standards prevent corporations from exploiting regulatory gaps. Scale changes behavior. Investors respond differently to regional stability and policy consistency. Africa does not need to threaten anyone. It only needs to recognize necessity. If electric vehicle production depends on steady cobalt supply, disruptions hurt manufacturers. If hydrogen strategies depend on platinum, long-term contracts become strategic partnerships. The shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking, will they invest? The question becomes, under what terms will we allow integration? However, leverage without structural capacity is fragile. Can Africa convert this leverage into lasting industrial architecture, or will it remain theoretical? Recent global rhetoric reveals anxiety. Mineral access is now framed as security. Supply chains are described as strategic vulnerabilities. Alliances are justified in the name of stability. Why? Because policymakers mapped mineral dependencies and discovered a significant portion of the future runs through African soil. Historically, whenever regions rich in strategic commodities strengthened coordination, global politics adjusted. Oil-producing nations demonstrated this in the 1970s. Rare earth supply disputes reshaped diplomatic conversations in Asia. Africa's minerals now occupy a similar position. But repositioning requires discipline. Fragmentation has historically weakened Africa's leverage. Competing tax incentives, short-term political calculations, and uncoordinated licensing systems allowed buyers to play gaps. Discipline means resisting quick capital that undermines long-term strategy. It means refusing contracts that lack downstream integration. It means aligning national policy with continental strategy, even when domestic politics become noisy. Symbolism can inspire a generation. Only discipline builds infrastructure. Young Africans are not interested in theatrical sovereignty. They want measurable sovereignty, measured in megawatts of domestic processing power, percentages of minerals refined locally, equity retained, and patents filed by African engineers. Governance reform is critical. Corruption weakens leverage faster than foreign pressure ever could. If mineral wealth leaks through opaque contracts, transformation collapses from within. Balance is essential. Africa must assert itself without isolating investors. It must negotiate firmly while maintaining stability. Institutional maturity determines whether leverage becomes transformation. There is also urgency. Global powers will diversify supply if Africa hesitates. New mining zones will emerge. Recycling technologies will expand. Substitutes will be researched. Leverage has a window. Windows close. If Africa converts strategic minerals into strategic power, success will look tangible. It will look like refineries operating on African soil, metallurgical engineers trained locally, industrial zones connected to reliable power grids, rail corridors moving processed materials not just raw or to regional markets. Beneficiation multiplies revenue. Processing lithium into battery-grade material captures higher margins. Converting platinum into fuel cell components captures technological layers. Refining cobalt regionally integrates Africa into higher value segments of the electric vehicle supply chain. Mining creates jobs. Processing creates ecosystems, engineers, technicians, logistics networks, research institutions. Universities align programs with industrial demand. Vocational training modernizes. Contracts also change. Mineral access becomes tied to infrastructure development. Processing facilities are co-owned. Technology transfer becomes mandatory. Equity stakes are negotiated. This is not anti-investor. It is pro-balance. Investors prefer predictability. Predictability increases when terms are clear and consistently enforced. Macroeconomic discipline matters too. Mineral revenues must reinforce industrial strategy, not increase debt vulnerability. Sovereign wealth funds should reinvest in domestic capacity. Peace and stability strengthen leverage. Governance capacity signals long-term reliability. Success also reshapes perception. When battery components stamped, "Made in Africa" enter global markets, narratives shift. Africa moves from being the starting point of supply chains to becoming an integral node within them. And when a continent negotiates from strength, posture changes. Global systems are pragmatic. If Africa insists on processing before export, companies adapt. If equity participation becomes standard, financial models adjust. Supply chains reroute. Joint ventures expand. The world negotiates with necessity. This does not eliminate inequality overnight, but it changes tone from relief to partnership, from vulnerability to co-design. Power has always been rooted in production capacity. Nations that control manufacturing shape trade norms. Regions that control strategic inputs shape security discussions. Those who occupy both spaces influence rulemaking. Historically, Africa controlled resources but not transformation. If it succeeds in occupying both spaces, influence multiplies. External actors will respond with diversification and substitution. That makes internal coordination even more critical. A single fragmented policy reversal can undermine years of progress. But if discipline holds, something deeper happens. A generation internalizes practical sovereignty measured in industrial output, export statistics, and retained margins. When refinery lights glow before sunrise, they symbolize permanence. And permanence changes psychology. Africa stops asking where it fits in the global order. It begins shaping it.